Why Sean Murray refused to play McGee like Gibbs. The room was quiet except for the hum of fluorescent lights and the soft rustle of a script being flipped for the 100th time. Sean Murray sat alone, long after the rest of the cast had gone home, staring at lines that didn't quite feel like they belonged to him, or rather, to Timothy McGee. It wasn't that the words were wrong. They were sharp, decisive, authoritative. They sounded powerful. They sounded like Gibbs. And that was exactly the problem. From the earliest days of stepping onto the NCIS set, Murray understood something that many actors struggle with. Not every character is meant to command a room by silence alone. Not every leader is forged from stoicism and steel. Some are built from doubt, growth, empathy, and the quiet courage to evolve. McGee was never supposed to be Gibbs. At first, the pressure was subtle. A line rewritten here, a note from a producer there. Can we make McGee a little tougher? Maybe play this moment more like a command. Think how Gibbs would handle this. It made sense, in theory. Gibbs was the center of gravity, the sun around which the team orbited. His presence defined the rhythm of the show. Naturally, as McGee grew from a nervous junior agent into a seasoned veteran, the temptation to shape him into a new Gibbs became stronger. But Murray resisted. Not loudly, not dramatically. He wasn't the kind of actor to storm into a room and demand creative control. Instead, his refusal was quieter, more deliberate, woven into the way he delivered a line, the hesitation before a decision, the softness in moments where others might have chosen hardness. Because Murray believed something fundamental. If McGee became Gibbs, then McGee would cease to exist. In those early seasons, McGee was the outsider, the probie, the guy who stuttered under pressure, who got teased, who wrote sci-fi novels in his spare time. He wasn't a warrior carved from war and loss. He was human in a way that felt accessible, even fragile, and that fragility mattered. Murray saw it as the character's strength, not his weakness. He knew audiences didn't need another Gibbs. They already had one, and a perfect one at that. What they needed was contrast, balance, someone who could stand beside that intensity and offer something different. Thoughtfulness instead of instinct, curiosity instead of certainty, heart instead of armor. There was a moment, one that never made headlines, never sparked fan debates, but quietly defined Murray's approach when a scene called for McGee to confront a suspect. The original direction leaned heavily toward intimidation. Sharp tone, hard eyes, minimal words. Gibbs style. Murray paused before filming. What if, he suggested gently, he doesn't try to scare him? The room shifted. The idea seemed almost counterintuitive. This was NCIS. This was interrogation. Power dynamics mattered. But Murray continued. What if McGee talks to him instead? Not like an agent, but like a person? That small shift changed everything. The scene became less about dominance and more about connection. McGee listened. He empathized. He disarmed the suspect not with fear, but with understanding. And in doing so, he revealed a different kind of strength, the kind that doesn't need to prove itself. That was the McGee Murray fought for. Over the years, as the character matured, the pressure to harden him never fully disappeared, especially as leadership roles began to shift and the question lingered. Who steps up when the old guard steps back? For many, the answer seemed obvious. McGee had the experience, the loyalty, the history, all the ingredients to become the next version of the team's backbone. But Murray saw a different path. He didn't want McGee to lead like Gibbs. He wanted him to lead like McGee. That meant embracing uncertainty instead of hiding it. It meant asking questions instead of issuing orders. It meant trusting the team not just to follow, but to contribute, to challenge, to grow together. Where Gibbs ruled with instinct and authority, McGee would lead with collaboration and insight. And that distinction wasn't just creative, it was deeply personal. Murray once reflected in quieter conversations behind the scenes that playing McGee had mirrored parts of his own journey. The feeling of stepping into a space where others seemed larger, more confident, more defined. The gradual realization that you don't have to become them to belong. You just have to become yourself. That philosophy seeped into every layer of his performance. Even in moments where McGee had to be strong, when the stakes were life or death, when decisions had to be made, Murray resisted the urge to strip away the character's humanity. His McGee could be firm, even commanding, but there was always something beneath it. A flicker of doubt, a trace of compassion, a reminder that strength doesn't have to come at the cost of feeling. And audiences noticed. They saw themselves in McGee in ways they never could in Gibbs. Not because one was better than the other, but because one felt closer, more reachable, more real. The evolution of McGee became one of the show's most quietly powerful arcs. Not a transformation into someone else, but a deepening into who he already was. There's a particular kind of courage in refusing to follow a proven path. especially when that path has already led to success. It's easier to imitate greatness than to redefine it. Easier to echo a legacy than to carve out your own. But Murray chose the harder route. He chose authenticity over expectation. He chose growth over imitation. He chose McGee. And in doing so, he didn't just preserve the character. He elevated him. Because in the end, the strength of a team isn't built on copies. It's built on differences. On the interplay between contrasting forces. On the idea that leadership can take many forms, and that no single mold defines what it means to be strong. Gibbs was the foundation. McGee became the bridge. And Sean Murray understood that if he blurred that line, if he allowed McGee to become a shadow of Gibbs, then both characters would lose something essential. So he refused, not out of defiance, but out of respect. Respect for the character, respect for the story, respect for the audience, and perhaps most importantly, respect for the quiet truth that being different isn't a limitation. It's the very thing that makes a character unforgettable. There came a time when the question stopped being whispered and started being asked out loud. What happens when Gibbs is gone? On a show like NCIS, that question wasn't just narrative, it was existential. For nearly 2 decades, Mark Harmon's Leroy Jethro Gibbs had been more than a character. He was the tone, the gravity, the unspoken rulebook. His presence shaped every interrogation, every silence, every look across the squad room. So when his shadow began to recede, naturally, eyes turned to Sean Murray's Timothy McGee. Could he step into that space? But Murray had already made up his mind long before the question became urgent. He wouldn't. Not because he couldn't, but because he shouldn't. Behind the scenes, this philosophy began to influence more than just performance. It subtly guided the emotional architecture of the show itself. Writers started leaning into McGee's perspective more, not as a replacement for Gibbs, but as a counterweight to what had been lost. Instead of filling silence with intensity, McGee filled it with thought. Instead of cutting conversations short, he let them breathe. Instead of assuming control, he shared it. And something unexpected happened. The absence of Gibbs didn't feel like a void, it felt like a shift. A recalibration. In one pivotal scene, again, not one that made headlines, but one that quietly reshaped the dynamic. McGee is faced with a decision that Gibbs would have handled in seconds. A suspect. Limited time. High stakes. The kind of moment where instinct screams louder than reason. You can almost feel the ghost of Gibbs in the room. Do it fast. Do it hard. Don't hesitate. But McGee hesitates. Not out of weakness, but out of awareness. He looks at his team. He listens. He processes. And when he finally acts, it's not with the sharp finality of Gibbs. It's with a layered understanding of the consequences. The scene plays differently. Slower. Softer. But no less powerful. That was Murray's quiet rebellion. Because what he understood, perhaps better than anyone, was that audiences had already experienced years of certainty through Gibbs. What they hadn't seen as deeply was what comes after certainty fades. What leadership looks like when it's no longer absolute. McGee didn't have all the answers. And that was the point. In fact, Murray leaned into that uncertainty as a defining trait. He allowed McGee to question himself in ways Gibbs never would. To revisit decisions. To carry the emotional weight of outcomes instead of burying them under stoicism. It made the character more vulnerable, but it also made him more human. There's a scene between McGee and a younger agent, a mirror of who he once was. The agent is nervous, unsure, looking for direction. The expectation is clear. This is where McGee becomes Gibbs, where he delivers a firm, almost intimidating lesson, a rule, a command. Instead, McGee does something different. He reassures. He shares a story, awkward, slightly self-deprecating, about his own early mistakes. He admits uncertainty. He doesn't elevate himself above the agent. He stands beside him. And in that moment, the power dynamic shifts. Leadership isn't about distance, it's about connection. That choice, simple as it seems, reflects years of intentional performance. Years of Murray asking himself not what would Gibbs do, but what would McGee do, and refusing to let the two answers become the same. Even in the way McGee occupies space, the difference is clear. Gibbs was stillness, a coiled presence that commanded attention without movement. McGee, on the other hand, is motion, subtle gestures, expressions that flicker across his face, a physicality that suggests thought in progress rather than decisions already made. These are not accidents. They are choices, and they speak to a deeper understanding of character evolution, not as a straight line toward dominance, but as a widening of perspective. Murray once hinted, in an offhand remark during a panel, that the biggest mistake a long-running show can make is confusing growth with replacement. Just because someone grows, he said, doesn't mean they have to become someone else. That idea became the backbone of McGee's later seasons. He didn't become a new Gibbs. He became a better McGee. More confident, yes. More capable, certainly. But still grounded in the traits that made him stand out in the first place. His empathy, his intelligence, his quiet resilience. And perhaps most importantly, his ability to adapt without losing himself. Because in a world like NCIS, filled with danger, loss, and constant pressure, the easiest defense is to harden, to build walls, to shut down the parts of yourself that feel too much. Gibbs mastered that. McGee resisted it, and Murray made sure of it. He protected that emotional openness like it was the core of the character, because it was. Strip that away, and you don't just change McGee, you erase him. By the time the show fully embraced its new era, something remarkable had happened. The team didn't feel like it was missing a leader. It felt like it had gained a different kind of one. Not louder, not harsher, but deeper. And that difference traced all the way back to a quiet decision made years earlier, on a set, under fluorescent lights, with a script that didn't quite feel right. A decision to resist imitation, to trust nuance over expectation, to believe that strength can look different and still be strong. Sean Murray never refused outright. He didn't need to. He simply chose, again and again, to play McGee as McGee. And in doing so, he proved something that goes beyond one character, one show, or even one performance. You don't honor a legacy by copying it. You honor it by continuing it, your own way. By the time the squad room had fully settled into its new rhythm, something subtle, but undeniable, had changed. It wasn't just the absence of Leroy Jethro Gibbs. It was the presence of something new. For years, the heartbeat of NCIS had been defined by certainty. Cases moved with precision. Decisions carried weight because they came from a man who rarely doubted them. Even silence had a kind of authority when it came from Gibbs. But now, the silence felt different. Not empty, just open. And at the center of that shift stood Timothy McGee, exactly as Sean Murray had always intended him to be. Not a replacement, a continuation. There's a quiet scene. One of those moments that doesn't rely on action or shock, but lingers because of what it doesn't say. McGee stands alone at his desk late at night. The lights are dim. The office is still. He looks toward Gibbs' old space. Not with longing, not with intimidation, but with understanding. It's the kind of look that says, I know what that meant, and I know what I am. That distinction, small as it may seem, is everything. Because what Murray protected over the years wasn't just a character trait. It was an identity, a boundary, a line that said McGee could grow, evolve, lead, but never at the cost of becoming someone else's echo. And in the long run, that choice reshaped how leadership itself was portrayed on the show. Where Gibbs was a symbol of control, McGee became a symbol of adaptability. Where Gibbs carried the weight alone, McGee distributed it. Where Gibbs taught through rules, McGee taught through experience. One of the most defining aspects of this evolution came not in moments of strength, but in moments of doubt. There's an episode where everything goes wrong. A case unravels. A decision backfires. The kind of situation that, in the past, would have been met with steely resolve and a tightening of control. Instead, McGee calls the team together. And he admits it. I got this wrong. It's a simple line, but it lands harder than any command ever could. Because it breaks an expectation that had been built over years of television storytelling. The idea that leaders must always appear certain, even when they're not. Murray pushed against that idea. He allowed McGee to fail visibly, to process openly, to grow honestly. And in doing so, he created a version of leadership that felt not only different, but necessary. Because the world had changed, audiences had changed, and the idea of strength had evolved beyond silence and stoicism. McGee reflected that evolution. He wasn't the man who walked into a room and owned it through presence alone. He was the man who made the room better by being in it, who listened more than he spoke, who understood that authority isn't about control, it's about trust. That approach began to ripple outward. Newer agents responded differently to him than they ever had to Gibbs. They weren't intimidated, they were engaged. They didn't just follow orders, they contributed ideas. The dynamic shifted from hierarchy to collaboration. And that shift made the team stronger, more flexible, more human. Behind all of it was Murray's steady, unwavering commitment to a single principle: authenticity over expectation. He never chased the version of McGee that would have been easiest to play. He chose the one that was truest, even when it meant going against instinct, against notes, against the quiet pull of a legacy that could have easily overshadowed everything. There's a kind of artistry in that restraint, in knowing when not to take a scene in the obvious direction, in choosing vulnerability over dominance, in trusting that subtlety can carry as much weight as intensity, if not more. And perhaps that's why McGee's journey resonates so deeply, because it doesn't feel like a transformation into something larger than life. It feels like a reflection of something real. The idea that growth doesn't require you to abandon who you were, that leadership doesn't demand you erase your softer edges, that strength can exist alongside doubt, empathy, and change. In many ways, McGee became the audience's anchor, not because he was the strongest or the most decisive, but because he was the most relatable, the one who learned, adapted, questioned, and kept going. The one who didn't have all the answers, but kept searching for them anyway. And that was never an accident. It was a choice, a refusal, a quiet, consistent decision made by an actor who understood that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is not follow the path laid out before you. As NCIS continues to evolve, the legacy of Gibbs remains untouched, solid, iconic, irreplaceable. But beside it stands something equally important. Not a shadow, not a successor, but a different kind of legacy. One built not on imitation, but on individuality. One that proves there's more than one way to lead, more than one way to be strong, and more than one way to leave a mark. Sean Murray didn't just refuse to play McGee like Gibbs, he showed why he never should have. And in doing so, he ensured that when audiences look back on the long, winding history of NCIS, they won't just remember the man who defined it,